Welcome to the Fearfully and Wonderfully Me podcast, a podcast designed to help you increase your influence, develop your leadership, and maximize your results. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the podcast. Today's episode is all about navigating the fog and narrowing your focus. Or as I like to say, I said it in my book, Bridges Out of the Past, A Survivor's Lessons on Resilience, where I dedicated a whole chapter to crossing from fear and fog in our lives during a time of uncertainty and crossing over into a time of focus, right? And I think that's a question that we all encounter at some point, is when we're going through uncertainty or hard times or adversity, and it can be very much like a fog. If you've been driving a car for more than a few months, you've probably experienced a time where you drove in a heavy fog and it's just so dense and you cannot see beyond just a few feet. And it's a little intimidating. It's a little overwhelming, right? If you're driving and trying to navigate a car and you can't see where you're going. And I think times of adversity or uncertainty in our life are just like a heavy fog sometimes that descends around our car, and we can't really see down the road or how far we want to go, and it can be scary, intimidating, and even overwhelming. And the thing about that is when you encounter that fog or that season of adversity, the temptation would be just like it is in a real car. The temptation is to just pull over and sit there and wait for the fog to lift, wait for the sun to come out. But here's the thing, you don't know how long that fog is going to be there. You don't know if the sun's going to come out and burn that off. And maybe you have somewhere to go in your life that you can't just sit around and wait for the fog. And I think it's very tempting to pull off whenever we get to that season in life when we're facing adversity. We have fog in our own lives, so to speak. It's very easy to get derailed or distracted or, take a detour because we don't have that feeling of certainty relative to where we're going and can we see where we're going. And yet we cannot allow ourselves to be derailed, right? Because here's the thing, you already know this, but life can be tough, right? Life is full of hard seasons. You don't need me to tell you that. But I use this example because it's so powerful. And there certainly have been many seasons in my life when I've had uncertainty and big changes that can be scary or overwhelming. Certainly seasons of fog where I didn't necessarily know the direction I was going, right? But one thing I knew is that I couldn't stop, right? I wasn't going to get through the fog faster by sitting still. We have to keep that in mind, that if we want to get through the fog sooner, we have to keep moving forward consistently, right? You don't have to go 100 miles today, but if you can just go a few steps and a few steps and a few steps. So I wanted to share a quote with you. Rich Stern says, he's the CEO of World Vision. He says, whatever we are facing, we can rest in the assurance that the outcome does not depend on our strength, but on God's. And I really like that because I think that's the first key to crossing from fog to focus, so to speak. I think that's the first key, is that we need to choose faith over fear, right? And if you're a person of faith, which I'm certainly am sharing my faith here, but I think it's important to just simply make that choice. It doesn't mean it's an easy choice, but whenever you're facing a season of adversity or hardship or a challenge in your life, it is a choice that we make to choose faith over fear. It means that as Christians, we've already made the decision that we can transcend earthly experience, right? That's because we believe in the grace that Jesus offers us. And so that choice isn't easy, right? I know it's not easy. I realize that when you're going through a tough season, it's tough. And you don't always feel like saying, okay, Lord, I know you have a plan. I don't know the plan, but I know there is a plan. But that is a decision that we make, right? Faith is that belief, that decision that we make because we don't know it for sure, right? And that's what changes our heart, is taking that step in faith and not knowing, right? It's just like in the example of walking on the water, and that's a faith step, right? You can't walk on water until you get out of the boat, and that's a faith step because you don't know for certain what will happen when you get out of the boat. So I think that's the first step. Now, there again, it's not easy necessarily, but you can't have fear if you have faith. Terry Smith said, Fear is faith moving in the wrong direction, right? Those two emotions don't exist at the same time in your head. They can't exist, because if you have faith and trust in the certainty of God's plan, then you don't have that fear, because there's no room for it. And vice versa. If you have a lot of fear, you don't have room for the faith that you need to navigate that challenge. So if you're a person of faith, I think that's really the first key. The fundamental key there is sitting down consciously and saying, I'm going to choose faith over fear. Now, the second thing that I think is really important, the second key to moving from the fog to focus in our lives and getting out of the fog, is narrow our focus, because fog is overwhelming, right? It's just that heavy blanket that just covers everything. And it's very easy to get distracted and overwhelmed, as I said. But the thing is, just like when you're driving a car and you're told in the driver's manuals, and if you've been driving for a while, you know this, you've experienced this, you turn off your high beams and you turn on the low beams in the car, right? Because you're narrowing that focus of the headlights so that they can see just a little bit closer in front of you. But when you narrow that focus, your focus isn't reflecting off of the fog and just blinding you. And I think that's very applicable to our own life as well, right? When you're feeling overwhelmed in that season, don't focus on everything around you, but narrow that focus to the one or two most important things at the moment, right? The one or two most critical things that you can focus on right now. For example, I have an incredible to-do list because I've always got lots of exciting projects and things that I want to do, but particularly in a busy season, like for the next several weeks, as we wrap up the year, Mac and I have a lot of speaking and travel engagements coming up, and that's certainly a blessing. But managing all of our travel and things like that, and then also trying to tackle the end of the year projects that I like to be working on, means I have just a list of things that I want to get done and achieve, and it can be overwhelming. And what I realize is that I don't need to focus on everything. I need to just focus on one or two most critical things every single day. And when I get those done, then I can move on to the other things. But see, as humans, it's very easy for us to get distracted, right? Distraction is the enemy of focus in your life. And that does not serve you well. So crossing through fog, I think it's especially important when we're going through times of adversity to really be mindful about narrowing our focus and say, okay, let's get rid of the fluff. What gets down to must get done or should be done, or what is most critical. I always like to have two lists going into a busy season of travel like this. I have this would be nice to do, but this list must get done, right? And things that must get done, when you really get down to it, narrowing the focus really helps you be more intentional about honing in on it. And I find I'm more productive. And there again, it's also less distracting. It's easier to be intentional and not get distracted by the little things that pop up that are certain to derail your progress. So very important there, second step, narrow your focus. And sometimes that means saying no to the good so that you can really concentrate on that thin line that you know you need to travel, right? Say no to the good so you can say yes to the great. And then I think the third thing, and probably last but not least here, is really applicable. And this is one of the things I talk about in Bridges Out of the Past in the chapter on moving from fog to focus. Take some time for rest, because when you're going through that season of adversity or challenges and frustrations or fog, so to speak, it's very easy to get overwhelmed, and your body and your mind need more rest in that season, right? When you're pushing harder up the mountain, you need more rest because you're going up a bigger mountain. And so it's just like, in a physical world, if you're going to go, hike up a little hilltop, you might get a little breathless, but you've got the energy to go up to the top. But if you're climbing Mount Everest, you are having to put all your physical and mental resources into getting up that mountain. You're going to need a lot more rest after that experience versus just strolling up the hillside, right? So when you're pushing harder in life, don't forget to give yourself some more time, some extra time for some rest, for some recreation, for some time to fill you back up, right? That renewal, that recreation that we know is so important, but it's so easy for us when we get busy or overwhelmed. The holidays are coming up. I guarantee you so many people, the first thing that they're going to do is stop sleeping as much because they're busy, they're overscheduling themselves, overcommitting themselves. And what they'll do is that their health will start to suffer because they'll start, sleeping less, eating worse, all of those little things that don't feel big in the moment, but they add up over time. So I really like to encourage people when it comes to being resilient, don't forget that it's okay to take a little extra rest. In fact, it's so important to help you navigate through that season or that obstacle sooner, quicker, right? Faster, because you're more recharged. And the thing is that when you're tired, you don't think you don't think well. You don't make good decisions when you're tired. It's just like when you're hungry. Nobody ever makes great decisions when they're hungry. And it's interesting to know how many calories your brain actually needs, throughout the day just to maintain it. It's something like 300 or 400 calories a day that your brain is using, right? And so when you're hungry or you're not feeding your body appropriately, your brain is starving, you don't think good. And so you can't be your best self. You can't be your most productive. You can't make great decisions. It's why when we're starving and we're hungry, we turn to things that are just, a quick fix like a candy bar instead of some, steamed broccoli, because our body intuitively knows it needs the sugar and calories. And so it wants that quick fix. And it's so easy to make the wrong choice when you're faced with that and you're hungry, you're frustrated, you're tired. There again, you're not going to be functioning at your highest level with your best amount of energy if you're not taking time for downtime. And I know it's hard to do. I know you obviously, if you're listening to this podcast, you want to be an achiever, you are a high achiever, you have things you want to get done. And so important to just remember to keep that in perspective with taking the time for some downtime. And that really does come down to being intentional about it. It's okay to schedule some extra time for yourself when you're navigating the fog. I can remember, just over the seasons of life, there have been a couple of different, really major changes in life for me over the past couple of decades. And obviously, the first one was really after I left home, right? And leaving what was a horrible situation and moving to a new situation, but it came with so much uncertainty. And not only just uncertainty around life in general, but I was living in a new town and going to a new gym and had a new routine. And back then, you didn't even have GPS, right? I had to figure out where I was driving as I navigated that. So literally, there was just so much uncertainty in just day-to-day life, and through that season of my life. And, then I think back to even obviously much later when, um, after I made the decision to leave working in the hospital and start, writing and speaking. And obviously that was a tough transition, a big transition, right? And it's easy there again, in those times of change or uncertainty, or when we're going through stressful situations, it's easier to think, oh, I need to work more, do more, work harder, and be constantly busy. And yet our brain and our body most craves more downtime, because that is what enables us to renew and rest and recharge. So tough to do. I know it's easier said than done, especially if you're busy or working, you have a family and you have to cook dinner and all of the things must get done. And usually it's easy to push yourself to the bottom of the list. But it's so important to recharge, especially when you're navigating, again, through that season of fog or difficulty, making sure that you are taking more time for some downtime, especially this holiday season as we come up. Until next time.